Welcome. Thank you for joining us for the 17th annual Top 10 Tech Trends Debate. And you are an amazing audience. It's hard to believe, but it has been almost 30 years since Rich Karlgaard and Tony Perkins founded the Churchill Club in 1985. And our nonprofit mission still excites us every day to encourage innovation, economic growth, and social good. What we care about is educating, inspiring, and connecting women and men everywhere who possess the Silicon Valley state of mind. And to us, what that means, people who are actively participating in advancing technology and how it relates to business and to life. And I don't think we could find anywhere with this much Silicon Valley spirit as we do at the Churchill Club. I think this room, too, is a great example of the importance of this special community coming together, because we all want smarter conversations, smarter encounters with people who have like minds. And this is exactly the opportunity that Churchill Club works hard and thoughtfully to create up to 40 times every year. So heartfelt thanks to you, our individual and corporate members. And for those of you who are not members, please decide to join us and show your support as a card-carrying member of the Silicon Valley state of mind. We thank our co-presenter, Forbes Media, and congratulate them for the 16th annual Midas list of the top 100 venture capitalists in the world. Our gold sponsor is Accenture, and we could never thank them enough for their incredible contributions to the Churchill Club. Thank you, Accenture. Our silver sponsors are Deloitte, Forbes, Luxembourg Trade and Investment, and Silicon Valley Bank. Thank you as well. And our bronze sponsor is Zeno Group, who is also our trusty and amazing PR team. So thank you, Todd Irwin and Zeno. A lot of people helped us to put this program together, and we really appreciate all the collaboration and partnerships. And there's one individual that I would like to call out in particular, and that is Chris Stedman of Silicon Valley Bank. We have an artist in residence for the event tonight. Her name is Pamela Davis Kivelson. She's right here in front, and she'll be creating drawings of all of the people speaking on stage tonight. Well, other than me, I'm pretty sure. You'll get to see them at the end of the evening. Pam teaches at the D School, and I think her website was showing there a moment ago, so you should go and visit it. Thank you very much, Pam. The incredible trend wizard cape that you'll see at the end of the show was also created by an artist, and her name is Catherine Levin. So thank you, Catherine. If you tweet tonight, please use the hashtag Churchill Club, and you'll find other Twitter codes in your programs. Tonight, we will be using Poll Everywhere's phone-based service to collect and display your input on the top 10 trends. It's very cool, I think, that their service allows us to gather your feedback and display it real time so that we can see the results right away. We really need your full participation, though, so let's do a sample vote now so that we can all be ready. So please take out your phone. Ringer off, please. Open a browser and go to pollev.com/top10. And now you should be able to vote on whether you would prefer to be lucky or smart. I know we all want to be lucky and smart, but we can only vote once. I like that. So we can see the results coming in. Remember, please take out your phone for every trend and vote, because it's the only way that we are going to be able to have a full representation of what this audience thinks. So take it upon yourself to vote and get your voice counted. I think we're ready to call up our 5 pundits. Let's start with Shervin, Pishevar, Sherpa Ventures. Rebecca Lynn, Canvas Ventures. Jenny Lee, GGV Capital. Steve Jurvetson, DFJ. Bill Gurley, Benchmark. Welcome. Now let's welcome our MCs. Rich Karlgaard. Rich Karlgaard and Bruce Upbin. Oh, here you are.
I think Gurley needs a short chair.
Thank you so much, Karen. You know, in the near 30 years that we've had the Churchill Club, we've been led by an extraordinary number of CEOs, but none better than Karen Tucker. So let's give Karen a big hand. And I wish my co-founder Tony Perkins is here. Maybe he's here and slipped in, but not only did Tony instrumental in starting the club, but he started this, our most successful long-term event, 17 years ago in 1998. So let's give Tony a hand, even if Tony's not here. On behalf of Forbes, we're thrilled to participate here. I'm pinch hitting actually for our Forbes CEO, Mike Perlis, who's done this event a number of times. And in fact, Mike is entirely appropriate to do this event because he was for 10 years a managing or a general partner at SoftBank Ventures. So he's very familiar with the venture field as well as the field of publishing. I want to just make a couple comments on this event, and then Bruce is going to make a couple comments, and then we'll get going. We really have to give the people, our five pundits, a lot of credit here because, you know, everything they say up here is going to be permanent. I mean, that's part of the web, right? Is that nothing ever disappears. So I was going back over the last 17 years and looking at some of the spectacularly good and spectacularly bad predictions, and I thought I would just tell you a couple of each, examples of each. On the spectacularly good side, this is almost like the more difficult the circumstances in Silicon Valley happen to be, the more it seems to focus the mind, because after the dot-com crash, the predictions in the 2001 and 2002 period were actually better than any other 17-year period. And the vision for software as a service, cloud computing, all of those things were said by many people and said with conviction, and they all got it. They all got it right. I was thinking of another one in 2012 when Reid Hoffman predicted that Silicon Valley paced disruption would begin to hit every industry that you could think of, and I think he's been spectacularly right on that. There have been some bad ones. By some good people, certainly smarter people and more successful investors than I happen to be. In 2008, Vinod Khosla said oil will have trouble competing with biofuels. In 4 to 5 years, we will have production proof that we can sell biofuel at well below $2 a gallon without tax subsidies. And then he said, speculated that there would be no more big oil companies in that 4 to 5 year time frame. And the panelists unanimously agreed with them. And then we had what you would call a mixed call. And it was the same year Roger McNamee said smartphones were going to sweep the world. Remember, this is just 1 year after the introduction of the iPhone. And he said smartphones would sweep the world. They'd be more disruptive. There would be a greater take-up rate at a faster pace than personal computers by an order of magnitude, which he got spectacularly right. And then he said, and Apple won't be one of them. So he whiffed on that. So I think we have to give him Roger mixed results on that one. Bruce, what have you seen over this period of time?
Well, Almost there.
We also tried crowdsourcing predictions in 2009, which was all too bad. I don't think that went too well. Put robots in our living room and augmented reality. Actually, George Zachary 2 years ago, I think, said that the wearable trend will be, the dominant wearable object will be a watch, not glass, which is actually quite a good bet. So thanks, George, for that. But you know, all in all, the prediction business is tough. I mean, this is a kind of a luxury moment for you all because you don't have to put money behind it. We were supposed to have 10 VCs here, but 5 were too busy just stuffing money down startups' throats. They couldn't make it. We have a lot of experience here. We have a total of, I think, 64 years of venture experience. I counted up between the
That's all Gurley.
5 of you. It was mostly. And 405,000 Twitter followers, which is mostly Bill Gurley also. But a bunch of Midas listers here, many of them repeat again. So as you know, the venture business is more about slugging percentage than it is about batting average. It's okay to fail because all you do is lose your money. You just don't want to miss that one amazing deal. So with that, we should probably get the ball rolling because it does tend to go on a bit.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, you're up first.
Okay, all right. So what we do is we ask our speakers to deliver trends with 2 criteria: that they're not obvious today, and that we'll see explosive growth in this area in about 5 years. So trend, and then the person who was presenting that trend will explain it to you. I will tell you a little bit about it, and then I get 2.5 minutes to persuade everyone in the room that this trend is a top trend, and then the panel will vote and comment, and then the audience will vote, and we'll see where we end up. So please do vote, because last year we had a runoff. It was, I think, how many decimal points out? It was 0.2 of a percentage point. Yeah. So every vote does count. So trend number 1, and this is Shervin. We'll start with you. On-demand ambient computing, driven by artificial intelligence, will usher in a world of invisible computing that will drive efficiencies across many industries. Growth will come from APIs, algorithms across mobile platforms. AI will predict human intent and deliver items and information at the speed of human thought. Take it away, Shervin.
How much time do I have?
2.5 minutes.
Okay, I'll be quick. What I'm getting at with on-demand ambient computing or invisible computing is the first practical use of AI will come about in a merger of what we're seeing in the on-demand world, where I can basically take out this remote control, my smartphone, push a button, and I can actually move steel in China. I can go to the Uber app and move a car in the streets of Beijing right now on this stage. That's a lot of power to have right here at my finger right in my hands. So the next thing that's going to happen is, rather than just being human-driven, because basically what we're predicting is that the search box in Google will be replaced here. Apps are already replacing search in many ways. And so now we could actually automate what you want by learning many patterns. In the Uber example, as Gurley knows well, is that we can pretty much predict where you want to go at the time that you're ordering the Uber. I think it's like something about 75% of the time. That kind of intelligence begins to become really valuable. And in invisible computing and ambient computing, what you'll see is services that will actually be able to predict what you want, what your intent is before you even express it. And what that means is you could automate all kinds of things. In that example of Uber, for example, if I'm taking a flight, that flight information could actually be, and I was delayed for 2 hours today, by the way. So the order for the Uber could have actually been changed automatically for when the actual delayed flight landed. So I didn't even have to take out my app or push a button on my watch, because it would just know. And the power of invisible computing and ambient computing is this merger of the on-demand world that we're seeing and the automation. And so the days of going in this Google search box and saying, here's what I'm thinking in my brain and this is my intent, all of that will begin to evolve in an automated way and serve our needs when we want it.
Okay, so now the speakers will vote with their paddles, green facing forward, red facing forward if you don't agree. Green is if you do agree. And then you have 5 minutes to... 5 minutes? 5 minutes. You don't have to take the whole 5.
No.
Shervin said Uber 3 times, so I'm green.
Green, 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 all green. All right, this conventional wisdom makes me scared.
But I didn't like his delivery.
Okay.
Yeah.
So coach him.
I'm sure it can be improved.
Be a
No,
mentor.
no, I mean, what I mean by that is, it was so close. I thought you were going to talk about machine learning and deep learning across calendaring and all the personal information we have, and I think that's where you're going.
Yeah.
Uber is one example.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I do believe it is the future, that we're going to have more and more places where our digital personas and feed into algorithms that know more about us than we know about ourselves to figure out we're always late for that meeting, so leave a little extra time, and eventually morph into something that feels like a personal assistant, and feels magical at each step of the way. So I think that's a pretty important thing that's going to be playing out for 5 years.
That's where Siri was going, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's magical when you first saw it, and then you got used to it, and then you expect a little more.
Then you get mad at it. Then it's
So I'm
supposed to read your mind.
200% behind this because that's my trend. That's why I talked about, I think, AI as well as deep learning. And we'll talk about it more, but it's completely on board.
There we go.
Phil? Holding fire?
Yeah.
Okay, let's put it out to a vote. Or Shervin, unless you want to counterpoint, say anything to what the panels talked about?
I agree I could have said it better, but...
Should have just let Jurvetson say it for you.
Okay, so we'll put it out to the audience to vote. No slackers. Can't tell if this is yes on the left or no is on the left.
I think yes is on.
Yeah, agree is on the left. Okay,
Yeah.
It's pretty good. Cool.
we'll give them like 15 more seconds. Those of you with iPhone 4s probably still waiting for the home screen to launch. Okay, it's a pretty resounding agree with Shervin. Well done. First time out.
Good work.
Triple. Rich?
All right, trend number 2. This is Rebecca Lynn's going to make this point. Traditional banks will continue losing share to startups while Bitcoin fades in relevance. Wow. Financial service institutions will continue to be disintermediated and we will either act as the back-end infrastructure or coexist as they do in the lending club model. Meanwhile, Bitcoin, hope Tim Draper's not here, as a currency and remittance solution will lose steam. Rebecca, take it away.
Yeah, so not to be criticized by Jurvetson later, I'm fully scripted tonight. So I learned last year to be a little bit more controversial on stage, so I know that there's some real Bitcoin aficionados here tonight. So let me just go out on a limb and just say I think it's going to, I don't have high hopes for Bitcoin over the next 5 years. Now I fully predict that traditional banks will continue to be disintermediated by startups, just not by Bitcoin. So we've had a theme of disintermediation of banking for a very long time, and it's pretty obvious that banks are inefficient and not so great at serving customers, and it's better done by fast, nimble startups that can build more personalized products, and that banks will have challenges across a number of categories, from foreign exchange to marketplace lending, remittance, wealth management, and in crowdfunding and real estate. But banks aren't going to go away. They're just going to serve a different point in the ecosystem. They're going to be banking as platforms whereby these startups can actually be placed upon them to grow. And banks are going to provide the appropriate, they'll continue to provide regulatory framework, infrastructure, custodial relationships, licenses and services that just don't make sense for a startup to build itself. And similarly, it doesn't make sense for a startup to become a bank. And that's probably the #1 way for me not to fund a financial services company if they come in and tell me they're going to be a bank. It's like magic right now to actually become one. So another example of how banks will continue to evolve is in lending clubs. So lending club started out as this peer-to-peer lender really taking on banks, was the largest US tech IPO of last year. And then recently announced they're partnering with Citibank. And Citibank is actually going to plug into the Lending Club platform. So as these startups evolve and take sort of their seat in the ecosystem, banks will learn how to partner with them. Now let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin specifically, because Bitcoin should hypothetically be the true disintermediation of banking play. And I've looked at a lot of startups to try to get religion around this. However, I actually see Bitcoin as fading and not growing in the next 5 years. Not to say there's not a place for blockchain, and not to say the idea of Bitcoin isn't compelling. It's really compelling, and the most compelling thing about it, in my opinion, is really this idea of free real-time rails for the movement of money. And it's really, really interesting when you get into these underdeveloped countries where the corresponding banking relationships are being cut off by US financial institutions. But as compelling as that might be, it's got some real hindrances. So volatility is issue number one. Now sure, you can get by that with some hedging. Hedging is not foolproof and it comes at a cost, thereby not free. Additionally, there's transaction cost on both ends to transfer in and out of, am I done?
Wow.
I'll talk faster next time.
That's a nice breakdown.
I didn't know that was coming.
That wasn't nice.
Well, let's see.
Especially with no countdown clock, right?
Just keep talking.
Just keep talking. Do we have like a gentler, kinder buzzer than that one?
That was kind of a rude buzzer, wasn't it? But Jenny or Rebecca will have time to come back and have another minute after the panelists have been heard from. But why don't we first see how the panelists think about this? Hold green to the audience if you agree with her, and red if you're skeptical, which in this context means that you wouldn't invest alongside of her.
No.
You, Steve?
Yeah. Bunch of wussies
I'm
up here.
gonna go
Okay,
red.
finally, somebody stands
Okay.
up for red.
Okay, Bill Gurley is the skeptic. Why don't you start out, Bill?
So she made 2 predictions, not 1. So, which makes it harder to, because you got to believe in both of them. But leaving Bitcoin aside, I'm actually quite skeptical that I think our banking system is the most corrupt industry in the U.S. political system and has the most control over policy. So I'm a fundamental believer that regulation protects the incumbent. And when you look at the situation where ACH takes 3 days, please, I mean, they are in charge. And when you continuously see fines instead of blocking, that's just like, it's a system. And so it's not really about her trend. I'm just skeptical that the U.S. government will stop protecting the banks, which they've been doing for 40, 50 years.
Well, that's a pretty good and cynical point.
Steve and
I'm trying to
the
be
other
Yeah, I
controversial,
like it.
like
I
she
agree.
said.
I hate to say
Steve,
it.
Jenny, Sherman, is that reason enough not to
sitting in
not to
China,
invest?
I truly believe that the traditional banks will continue to lose shares to the startups. The banks have been very archaic. Just give an example, right? So Alibaba just having an Alipay deposits account that says, hey, you know, if you're using Alipay to buy products on the Taobao, and by the way, if you keep your capital there, you know, say you have a $100 transfer to your account and you end up $80 where you buy a product for the $20, typically people do is transfer the $20 back to your bank account. What Alipay does is it says, hey, why don't I give you 3% earnings deposit savings rate on that $20? And what that does is immediately you get a huge part of the population getting excess capital out from the traditional bank account to put it into this holding account to earn 3%. So it's just a good example of how the new internet startups could easily, you know, take away the lunch of the big guys. We see it happening across the spectrum, and in China, highly big trend for us. I do feel though that Bitcoin may work in China. So, but between the two, I think the banks losing share is probably the bigger piece of the trend that we're going to see.
I was going to add, Goldman Sachs, who you would think would want to not see this happen, just came out a couple months ago with a report analyzing this in detail called the socialization of finance, and they conclude that millennials are leading a massive shift in about 4.7 trillion of this industry, so an enormous part of this industry, to more peer-based lending, peer-based solutions, everything from college loans to you name it. And they really do see that transition occurring through a new generation that just doesn't want to deal with the old banks, as well as new geographies. And you look at the developing world and such, it's not just a US phenomenon. So I think whether it's Lending Club and Prosper and Avant and all these companies, LendKey, it just goes on, they're they're growing, and they're growing their share at the expense of the traditional ones. With Bitcoin, she doesn't just say Bitcoin fails and goes away. She's more precise as a currency and remittance solution. And I think that probably is right, and that the thing that excites us the least, at least myself the least, about Bitcoin is its use as a currency, and more as a use as a sort of a mechanism for automated contracts, machine-to-machine micropayments, and even things like intellectual property protection. So if you have an infrastructure that's secure, you can do much more interesting things than just currency. And I think other currency standards are already well established, and it's not going to be like as exciting to talk about it.
Quick thought, Sherman?
Yeah, I think fintech is probably one of the most exciting areas to be investing right now. I think the idea that these old world banks can actually exist for much longer in the current structure that they're in, it just doesn't stand. Ironically, when I graduated out of Berkeley, I was inspired by the Hotmail service to try to do free banking services. So I registered hotbank.com, and then SoftBank contacted me and bought it for $20,000.
Wow.
I should have asked for some Alibaba stock, but
Probably paid for all of Berkeley back then.
yeah, that's true. So I think some young entrepreneur is going to disrupt this space. I'm excited about seeing what happens in the next few years. There's a company called Robinhood. I don't know if you've seen that, but they're doing kind of for millennials. They're doing free stock trading in an app, and you could see a company like Robinhood evolving into something even bigger than that. And so on the Bitcoin side, I think it's way too early to tell. So, that was a nicer.
That was
That
a
was
little
more
friendlier.
pleasant.
Yeah, I don't know why I got that one instead of the.
Rebecca, Bill was your skeptic, so maybe you
geez.
might want to address him. And was he talking chiefly about an American problem in
Yes.
the global economy?
American.
I can't disagree that banks are amazingly corrupt, and they make money coming and going. And so I just don't know what to say to that, but you're right.
All right.
All right. Chris Stedman of Silicon Valley Bank is turning various shades of red here, but of course we accept them from.
Silicon Valley Bank. Except for Silicon Valley Bank.
Audience, weigh in, vote early and vote often.
Bitcoin's very popular with the general population.
I was trying to be controversial.
I get, me too.
Trying.
The transaction volumes are picking up with Bitcoin. I saw that, I noticed, even if the price isn't moving that much.
It looks pretty stable here where it is, and we'd have to say that people are a little more skeptical of this one than they were of the previous. Bruce?
All right, trend number 3. This is Jenny Lee's trend called the virtual me. Advances in hardware and sensors and the adoption of connected devices will create an explosion of personal data in the next 5 years. With increased data processing capabilities and smarter predictive software, all this data will be aggregated into personal digital profiles, the virtual you, which will know even more about you than you do. Take it away, Jenny.
Yeah, so the way I think about this is in 2020, the predictions that goes on that says there will be 50 billion devices connected to the web. It's part of the IoT evolution. Along with that, the amount of data that's going to be processed is closer to 44 tetrabyte. I don't know what tetra is. It's actually 10 times more data than what we are processing today on a global basis. And if you compute all that data, the amount of data that, we're wearing wearables, we have smart home devices, it's collecting all this data. On average, a person has 5,200 gigabytes of data per person in the year 2020. So the trend that I have around virtual me, this is what we have here, is essentially hardware as we know it. It's not going to be about, are you wearing a smartwatch? It's going to be, do you have the tech? And that tech could be a membrane. Hardware should be unintrusive. It should happen. It should be following you. Sensors should be following you without you knowing that you have to charge. 5 years, the technology is here. It's going to be there, available. Data. So data, we're now talking about how do you, through deep learning, how do you then manage, process this data, whether it's in the cloud or whether it's through distributed computing. And finally, I think understanding what this data is, this is not just raw data, it's data around you. Where I am today, what I'm saying, how I feel, my heart rate, how I'm going to be at home, my state of mind. I think all that is going to come and create this very personal profile. We talk about mini me. This is why I said the virtual me. I'm lazy, so I hope that some days, some way, someone will tell me what I want to do or what I want to buy, where I want to go before I even know it. Because they have built a very good learning, through deep learning, very good profile about myself.
Okay. All right, panel. Let's see the paddles. No, well, red. Steve.
I'm going red again.
Everyone's
too.
going red. You can also go sideways if you want. You can hold the paddle
I
sideways.
should have done that.
Last year.
Okay, a lot of detractors. Why? What's wrong with Jenny's prediction, Bill?
So my issue with this one is that it's something that we call at our firm the Quicken problem. So 9% of American households use Quicken, but you would think 100% would. Everyone has to pay taxes, everyone has to track. And I just think humans don't want to be tracked that much. They don't want to be told they're messing up. They don't want to be told they could lose some weight. They just, they don't want any of those things. And so it's a human behavioral problem where I think if you start tracking these things and they start telling you what you should do, most people will put them in the drawer, which is, I think, where many, many of these devices already live.
That was, as someone who wears a Fitbit, and I'm thinking about sort of the entertainment value of the data I get. It's not something I see integrating over the next 5 years into something that actually gets to know me better. A possible path to the AI future, as we were talking about, was Sherwin's first prediction, it totally separate from the sensors and things of that sort, but just my location, my mobile, social, local profile, if you will. But then that sounds quite like the first prediction, and that doesn't seem to be quite what you were emphasizing. And I also don't think it'll actually know better than you what you want to do within anything like that time frame. It might, I think, be at best an assistant to what you want and make recommendations, like a smart personal assistant, but not a virtual you.
My turn? Okay. So I think this is what we call the engineers gone wild problem, right? Where everyone thinks all this data and personalization and stuff is something that people want. And I'm an engineer, but I was kind of educated at Procter & Gamble. And you realize that people don't really want that, right? And so, the thing about it, and I've done a ton of healthcare IT, and it boils down to lose 10 or 50 pounds, depending on what geo you live in. And so, and to do that, it's pretty easy. You just write down what you ate every day, and it doesn't even matter what you write down, just by virtue of writing it down, you're gonna lose 10 pounds. So sometimes these answers are really simple, but we think by overanalyzing them, we're gonna get into a better end state. I mean, the Fitbit's pretty simple, right? It just tells you how many steps you did. It doesn't tell you how fast you did each step, or how, it's just you did this many steps. And so sometimes those simple solutions are better and more efficacious, and I worry this kind of becomes almost like a nag, right? Where, you're not supposed to open the refrigerator after 10 o'clock at night, but you're gonna do it anyway. And if you got something sitting on you going, don't open the refrigerator, it's gonna go somewhere but the drawer, I think. I don't know. So I just, again, this is sort of, tech gone wild almost, I think, and people just behaviorally aren't gonna want it.
So I think one of our principles is the greatest products are born out of struggle and pain. And so those insights that are born out of a founder's personal pain or struggle in their own lives are the most interesting. I think in the healthcare space, this is the one trend that will be the most interesting. It'll be calibrated by a attention, which is more about human psychology, which is if you look at Facebook and Instagram and yes, we live in a more, quote, transparent world, but we're filtering what we want to show about ourselves and the identity of who we are, ourself, and how we portray ourselves. You can see that people show all the best things in their lives, right? And what's interesting about this is when you suddenly have a machine kind of learning system that says, here's the actual self, let me show you who you really are.
Here's the mirror.
And how lazy you might be, or how much you're eating, or how much your weight is going up, and so on. It might not be something that people want to actually see, and because human psychology
Except
will
the ones that are
push
fit
back.
already.
Huh?
The ones that are fit already.
Yeah, the ones that are fit
That's who
already
wears the fit
feel even better about themselves after that 80-mile bike ride. But I think that's the tension and the calibration in terms of improving the quality of people's lives. What I think it will take is true creativity by the entrepreneurs and the product leaders to come up with gamification systems and entertaining ways of transferring that knowledge and that information, that feedback loop to people without making them feel bad about themselves.
In preschool, they call it positive reinforcement, right?
Right, so-
You get marbles in the jar if you do
Can
that.
I rebut? So sitting in China, I think maybe on a cultural basis, there are differences. The Chinese population is used to being tracked. Privacy is not a consideration. From a MEMS perspective, from a hardware perspective, we are not talking about trackables that has to be powered. I think there are MEMS technology in place that you could basically embed and capture the data. So we can go more about this, but I think to go forward 5 years, technology can change a lot. And today's consumer are not age 40 and above like us here.
Hey, speak for yourself. Told you I
Or
was
30, right? We're talking
30,
about the millenniums, age 20.
All right, so let's throw it out there. What do you all think about the virtual you? There's that great scene in the Silicon Valley, the show, where that creepy VC guy has the voice in the ceiling that tells the kid to go to bed. You see that part? Because he doesn't want to be the bad parent. He can be the cool dad, and the voice can tell the kid what to do.
Oh my God.
We're going down on the disagree.
No, she's gonna prove us all wrong. Look at that. Well done.
Jenny's done it before. She's proved us wrong before.
Always.
Fresh.
Always.
I've been 99% right in all my predictions and investments.
Badass.
Wow.
The best VCs are always different.
There you go.
That's right.
Absolutely.
More red paddles, the better. Yeah. Okay. Let's call it there. She mostly agree. Rich.
That was a close one. Notice that each one is getting a little closer. Trend number 4, the Skynet economy, broadband access for the unconnected billions. This is Steve Jurvetson's. From thousands of satellites orbiting the poles and new airborne transponders, the entire Earth will be bathed in broadband, bringing an unprecedented influx of human talent to the global economy. Steve?
Thanks. So I'll try to be different. As I thought about top 10 trends, I tried to think of something that was profoundly important for a huge number of people. And this, I think, will be for most people on Earth. Those people who are not currently on the internet, who don't have access to all the things we take for granted, whether it's online education, whether it's access to resources, starting a company, connecting with people, communicating. They're fundamentally decoupled from the global economy, certainly decoupled from modernity. And 2/3 of those people that aren't on the internet today are that way because they live in rural areas outside the cities, and it's just too expensive to run fiber out to all those different places, so they don't have broadband. Some of you are familiar, if you want to show this slide, with Google's approach to this. They are going at it with drones and with balloons to try to cover urban areas primarily, and that's great. It'll go direct to the handset, route around governments and telcos, and direct to the consumer. That's fantastic. It doesn't really solve this last mile problem out to the hinterlands. So if you go to the next slide, what I'm describing is a new generation of low altitude satellites, much lower than geosynchronous satellites, about 35 times closer to Earth. So the latency is actually better than fiber for most terrestrial applications. So think of something that's fast, about 16 gigabits per second to each base station, and only possible now because of technology in phased array antennas and some new solid state amplifiers that make these things cost effective. They wouldn't have been just as recently as 5 years ago. So you have thousands of these satellites circling the Earth so that every part of the Earth is equally covered. Every remote farm, every boat, plane, car, anywhere you might want to put a ground station. And if we go to the last slide, I can show you what some of those look like. This one that you see here is from a company called OneWeb, backed by Virgin and Qualcomm. And it literally is everything you need. The solar cells, the batteries, the transponder, it's just in that little dome. It's $250. and you get 16 gigabits per second anywhere. No power needed, no grid needed. You put it in a village, on a school roof, wherever. This is going to be transformative for the developing world. And I think it's also going to be transformative for all the entrepreneurs in the room who are thinking about their target audience in the future, which could be not just 3 billion people on the internet, but 8 billion people on the internet by the year 2025. And by the year 2020, this constellation will be first operational. That's the deadline set by the regulatory bodies that issue the spectrum rights. And so both SpaceX and OneWeb are racing towards that goal and fully intend to have 2 constellations operational by then. There's possibly a third one in Europe as well. This is going to profoundly change the lives of these people. They can have access to online education, they could be entrepreneurs, they could do the sort of things we take for granted. And I think it allows the American dream to reach everyone on this planet. And to me, I can't think of anything more important over the next 5 years than giving people the basic access that makes all the other trends that we're going to talk about today possible.
That's terrific, Steve. Big idea. Let's see what your fellow panelists think of it. Would they invest alongside of you?
Is that the question?
No,
Well,
the
that makes
question
it
is, do you
easier.
think it's a top 10 trend? Because it doesn't have to be a startup. Yeah. No, seriously, is it, the
Trying to
question
get
is
you
not.
guys
The question
to
isn't would you
put a
invest.
little, you know,
The question
okay,
is
virtual
it
skin in the game.
is it one of the top 10 trends?
Vote.
Yeah.
Vote.
Yep.
Red or green?
She got a side.
So green, half red.
All right. Well, Bill, you're a resident skeptic tonight.
Yeah, I know, and I'm certain to get shot down as a result on my own. I thought about just going green every time. Steve and I talked about that. Actually, you triggered me in my direction when you said, would you co-invest? Because I wouldn't, just because of the Herculean nature of what's being attempted. So I admire the concept and the impact that it would have. And I think if you look at Iridium or other efforts to launch something of this, it's just complex. And the 2020 date, I think, will be missed. So that's it.
Can I say a quick response to that or wait till the other?
Let's wait till everybody's weighed in. Jenny?
I would love to see it in 2020. Don't know if it's going to come through, but I'm a proponent. I do believe that the globe has to be connected, whether it's with Skynet satellites, whether it's with 4G, 5G, technology. I think wishing for it is part of making it come true, because that's what's going to get enough capital, enough interest to then harness the efforts to make it come true. So supportive.
Very interesting. Yeah, and I agree it will help a lot of people, especially with communication and stuff. I think where I get skeptical is I think in Silicon Valley, we get sort of focused on this kind of stuff for a long time, and many of these people just don't have running water or any water at all. And so I think we think giving them a computer and like connectivity to the internet is great, but their infant mortality is through the roof and they have no water. And so I think there's bigger fish to fry maybe from here to there.
I think this is probably one of the greatest contributions we can make to humanity in our lifetimes. I think connectivity should be treated like a utility that's accessible to everyone on this planet, and the power of seeing how people's lives are transformed when information is freely available to them is absolutely critical. The one thing, as we saw in the revolutions that happened in 2011 in the Middle East, part of that trend, and I was involved in on the periphery on a number of things there, and one of the things that I said was that basically that connectivity is filtered by governments and dictators around the world. And so what you saw in Egypt, for example, was the first thing that Mubarak did was he shut down the internet, shut down the backbone. And the last bastion of dictatorship is the router. And so you see governments after governments filtering information. So one of the ideas that was proposed was, could we actually do satellite connectivity in these countries like Iran and North Korea and Egypt and Libya and so on. And in Libya, we actually, in the eastern side, they actually built a cellular network that was the Free Libya network. So this from information perspective is interesting, and then from a democratic movement perspective is also interesting. And what will be interesting is if you build this in that time frame, how those types of governments will react to a system that they can't actually control.
I think
Steve,
that's,
you have a
quick
minute?
retort. Yeah, I think that's spot on. These come with built-in both Wi-Fi, 3G, and LTE, and I think routing around bad government and bad telcos and corrupt organizations is a great idea. I think Bill's answer is appropriate for the wrong question, which I want to call you on after 17 years. The question has never been, would you invest? Because that would be an incredibly myopic view. We talk about trends.
Trying to get more reds.
Right.
And,
well, I know, but we talk about things that are non-investable sometimes, things that are led by large companies. This has fetched already $1 billion from Google and Qualcomm, another $1 billion. Wow. So this is not our game. We're not playing in it. I'm not pitching something that we've invested in. I'm pitching something that's important. Good point.
All right. Well, let's see what the audience thinks. Is this? Everybody agrees it's a great idea. Will it? The question is, within a 5-year time frame, do you think we'll make significant progress toward this goal?
And do we have to call it Skynet? That has some unfortunate associations to it. Can we call it something like Big Mother?
Big Mama.
Big Mama.
Big Mama.
Well, that looks like it's settled in at pretty close to a 60-40 ratio. So you won. That would be a good election win, Steve. You carried the day.
All right, trend 5. This is Bill's. This is the end of the auto nation, not the dealership, but the auto nation. For the better part of a century, the United States has designed its cities around the notion of individual car ownership. Anyone drives the 101 every day, you look around and there's one person every single car. This has resulted in massive waste, congestion, pollution, long commutes, remarkably underutilized capital assets, and more than 30,000 deaths per year. Suburban sprawl reached its ultimate limit, and the trends are all rebounding around a new urbanization. It's, caveat, Bill is an investor in Uber, okay, just so you know that.
So I need to move fast because I've got a lot of data that I want to get to you. And the one thing I would ask you on this, even if you vote against it, is just to step back, because your mind's been programmed on this world for your entire life, because the U.S.'s commitment to the auto started, in the 20s or 30s, and it's been a natural part of how we think about the world. Right now, there's 240 million cars in the U.S. That's 2.3 per household, which is just an amazing amount of cars, and they're idle 96% of the time. There's 1.1 billion worldwide, also idle 96% of the time, which is about $15 trillion of capital assets that are mostly not used, which is bizarre. There's other issues that come from this. There's parking lots everywhere. In Houston, there's 3.5 parking spots per car. In LA, if you took all the parking spots and laid them out on the ground, it would cover 81% of LA. And if you want to build an optimal, dense urban environment, you wouldn't include parking lots. But guess what? They're mandated in every city. There's a great book called The High Cost of Free Parking. If you read it, everything from funeral homes to convenience stores to Chinese restaurants, they have a list of exactly how many parking spots they have to have when you build them in a city. Uber's been partnering with some condominiums in San Francisco who want to go to Mayor Lee and say, we don't need those parking lots. And if you can replace the parking lot, you can lower the price of housing, you can make urban living better. There are other issues. There's congestion, energy. We're producing 90 million cars a year. That uses a remarkable amount of energy. Pollution, deaths. 32,000 deaths is in the US. There's actually 1.25 million deaths worldwide. We've had 1 million deaths in the past 25 years, 2 million in the past 50. Let me put this in perspective. If you add up all the wars, murders, genocide, homicide worldwide last year, 440K, with 1.25 million deaths in cars. And it's almost like we're numb to it. Everyone's really against the Iraq war and all that, right? How many soldier deaths in the last 15 years? 7,000. How many deaths on US highways? 500,000 in the same time frame. Yet it gets little of the attention that the other issue gets. Alcohol's apparent in a third of those deaths, and now texting and other things on your smartphone are rising and causing more of that. There's some good news though. We may have hit what is known as peak car. If you have time, go to Wikipedia, read about peak car. It means that this, oh shit, I have a whole bunch of that.
Well, if everybody agrees with you, you can have more time.
Okay. Oh, real quick, just real quick. The millennials are living in a different...
Talk about the deaths some more.
No, millennials, here's the deal. Here's the deal. Something's happening with the youth. So kids aren't showing up on their 16th birthday to get a driver's license. Driver's license for 19-year-olds is down from like 83% to 63% in like 10 years. And for everyone under 50, the number of driver's license is dropping per year. The miles driven by youth are down 23%. Ownership of cars, this one's crazy. In a 4-year window, the ownership of cars with youth is down 30%. And so, you know, we know that all the startups are in San Francisco. Young people want to live in an urban environment. And so my main point is I think we're going to see a trend that we've lived with our entire lives, which is you sell a car, you buy another one, start to change. And if we start selling cars without buying another one, it's going to have a huge impact on a whole number of industries. I don't know if it's a venture bet, but it may be a public short bet. I'll stop there. Thank you.
I've been given a note here for you guys to hold your paddles high so people in the back
All right,
of the room
let's see
can
paddles on the car trend. Green, sideways. Red, sideways. Not exactly consensus. What's going on? Rebecca.
Me? So first of all, I want to believe it. I think millennials might not be buying cars because they don't have jobs and they can't afford them.
You call me skeptical.
And I would have completely agreed until I got my Tesla, and I love it so much that I couldn't imagine like not having it. Because it's so fun. 0 to 70 in 3 seconds. It's amazing.
I'd have to agree. The reason I put this up is I do agree that this is true, but primarily in China. I don't know if there's much you can do in the U.S. just given LA, you know, like how are you going to change that over in at least in a 5-year period where you feel like change actually happened. And in India, there's just not enough political will at the federal level to just fiat stuff and like, you know, bulldoze new cities into being. They just sort of fix the slums they have. But in China, there's a lot of new cities being formed, and maybe you can add to that. And they have the opportunity to do it right. There's a notion Paul Romer has of charter cities where you might say, look, just like Shenzhen said, we're going to be an enterprise zone. If you don't like it, don't move here, because it was nothing but rice paddies when they started 25 years ago. What if you did the same? This town will have no combustion, right? No, if you want to drive a vehicle, it's an EV only, or it's going to be an electric Uber only. You could have any number of things like this, and I think urban design, I do believe that urban design can be radically improved with this in mind of getting the cars off the streets, and I know Google's working on that in a pretty aggressive way.
Yeah, so from a China perspective, I think next 5 years, definitely China is the largest consumption of cars ownership. If you look at it in 5 years' time, China will have close to 200 cities with north of 1 million in population. And generally, for the consumption public, the first thing they want to own when they are into an urban city is to have a car. It's a status show, it's freedom, and if you can afford a Tesla, it's even higher status. Tesla are selling, they're selling in Beijing as well. So yes, I think a lot needs to be done to make sure that the cities, the way it's designed, the roads are designed well, complementing both public and private transportation. But I think that innate desire to want to be in control, I think it's still going to be around.
I felt like you were inciting a riot and we're all going to go out and destroy cars in San Jose. So my son is one of those that's part of that trend. So he never got his driver's license. He's about to turn 18. He has his pilot's license, which he got when he turned 16, but he didn't want to drive, so he Ubers everywhere. So that's interesting. Now my daughter, on the other hand, can't wait to get her driver's license. So she's 14. She's going to turn 15 in September. And she has, basically counting by the day that she can go get her learner's permit and then her driver's license. So I thought that was an interesting, because I do think it's a form of freedom, and so she's looking forward to that freedom. And I think, that's an interesting insight. I think I support everything that Bill's talking about. I think in the developing world, that same sense of freedom, that being able to get around, is something that culturally needs to be changed. We had the same trend in America where people, when they could afford to get a car, finally after Ford was able to bring the prices down, and bring also the wages up for people to be able to afford it. That same trend is going to continue to happen. The question culturally is like, are you going to be able to replace that with a form of control in some other form factor? It could be a car that you don't actually own, but you fractionally own. A car as a service via Uber, via many of these different services that are coming out. And will that give people the same sense of freedom and control if they feel like they own a piece of something?
Okay. All right, Bill, you got a minute to
just real quick. I think one of the things you guys touched on is actually one of the trends that's happening. And it is that when I grew up, like I had a little cigar box that I put money in with a picture of a car on it, because like that was the only thing I wanted, like when I was 12. And the car was a social symbol of who you were and what you stood for. That's gone. Like, and I think if you talk to young people today, they think about cars in a utilitarian way, the smartphone's more of a social status than the car is. And part of what I'm getting at is that this mentality that we've all had for all these years about how your car is your freedom is not where the millennials' head is. Because if you have great mass transit services like Uber, you have the freedom you need. And they'd rather not have the hassle. Who wants to deal with it?
Okay. All right. What do you all think? You ready to give up your cars? Oh, no, that's not actually the question. The question is, do you agree with this trend? Do you agree with that we've reached peak car? I guess
Never coming back again.
5 years.
No, I'm kidding.
Uh-oh. We got a bunch of Detroit expats over here disagreeing. There's a lot of jobs in the automobile.
There's a ton. It would be dramatic. And if it goes from 2.3 to 2, it'll change everything. Like you don't need much.
I heard today that the #1 job by head count in most American states are truck drivers. And with self-driving trucks, which is
Coming.
those are another 3.5, 4 million jobs gone. I'm trying to talk it up to the degree.
I loved
Not
Uber.
very well.
I loved Uber until my Uber driver almost killed me a couple weeks ago. So Uber's a little more shaky than it used to be.
All right, I think the consensus is Bill may not be, might not be a peak car.
All right, we'll see.
Okay, well, continuing the transportation theme, Sherman has another one of these ideas you would have to call a really big one. The mode of transportation. The fifth mode of transportation will be unlocked in the next 5 years. Technologies like Hyperloop will skip over 19th and 20th century transportation modes and do what wireless mobile communication did to the fixed line telecommunications system in places like Africa.
So, frustrating experience today was I was trying to come here from Los Angeles. I was at Hyperloop Technologies headquarters, and the first flight was delayed, the second flight was delayed, mechanical problems, ended up with a 2.5 hour delay. Got here, then the traffic was horrible. It took 2 hours to get here. So transportation is one of the most taxing part of human productivity and time in our lives. And the faster we can move people and things, the more time we can actually gain back for more meaning in our lives with the people that we love and care for and the things that we love and care for. Technologies like Hyperloop are much simpler than people actually imagine. So I invite all of you, if you want, to come to LA and get a tour, but we just hit 32 people full-time some of the brightest minds in the world. 8,000 people have applied to join the company. And they're actually building things. So the prediction is we'll have Hyperloop working in about 24 months on a 2-mile track and hit over 700 miles per hour, and we can go faster than that. So the implications on the global economy, if you think about that, if we can move cargo and people at those speeds, the world becomes a village again. We can move between San Francisco and LA in 30 minutes with no schedule. You just show up and take the next one. This was, of course, Elon Musk's invention and idea because he was frustrated with the $70 billion allocated for high-speed rail that won't even be completed until Elon already reaches Mars. This is pretty funny. That's one form of the fifth mode of transportation. The one other one that I saw recently is very interesting is, I'll tell you later.
It's a secret.
You've been permissioned.
Yeah.
Possibly come back to that, but Hyperloop's certainly big enough of an idea for people to sink their teeth around. And remember, Shervin put himself out here by saying that this fifth mode of transportation, at least the Hyperloop part of it, will be unlocked in the next 5 years. So hold your paddles high so everybody in the room can see them. Got a couple of sideways here, huh?
Yeah, 2 sideways.
Okay. Why don't we start out with the skeptics?
Sure. I like the idea, and I just don't think it's going to clear the regulatory minefield between now and 5 years from now. So there may be, I guess, a proof of concept, but actually getting a deployment between cities where you get close enough into a city center that people care is a challenge. So outside LA, you might be in Scotts Valley if you want to get to Vegas or you want to get to here. The other thing that Elon himself will admit is this is only good for medium link distances, like LA to San Francisco, for example, not to New York or not certainly within a city. So for the vast majority of transportation in general, this just wouldn't apply. So as I think about like a top 10 list, even top 10 of transportation, I'm not sure this would be on that list in the 5-year time frame.
You couldn't go like San Francisco, Winnemucca,
It wouldn't.
Platinum, North
No,
Platte,
if your goal was to get, let's say, to the East Coast, he would argue supersonic jet's going to just be the much more efficient way. That this is really ideal for evacuated tubes between cities that aren't that far apart.
So I love the idea. I travel every week, whether it's Shanghai to Beijing, Shanghai to San Francisco, 13 hours flight, and to have a fifth mode of transportation that can cut travel time by 10 or 100, I think that would be great. I think, love to see it in 5 years. I think that cities in China would embrace this as well. The only question I have is how do you complete that last mile, right? It may be able to link city to city from rail station to rail station, but how do you then get from point to point? Which is you may spend 7 minutes going from, so for example, in Shanghai, they have the maglev. You spend 7 minutes from the Shanghai Pudong Airport to the middle of nowhere. It's 7 minutes, 300 miles, and then you have to figure out and take an hour and a half taxi cab to go from that point back to the city. So how do you get the loop, to point? That's something that I would love to see.
How about the semi-supporters?
When we were having dinner, Steve told me it cost $10 billion to do it, so that's it for me. That's all. And I wouldn't want to invest part of the 10.
I'm super excited about getting the trucks off the road and then just thinking about packing my 3 kids in my car and driving to LA or getting the full pat down in security. I would much rather do this.
By the way,
and I'll figure out the last mile issue, right?
I of course want it, like
The
really
pat down
bad.
in security or the Hyperloop?
No, the Hyperloop. and it's I give Shervin huge credit for like ambition and bravery. It's like as ballsy a, can I say that?
You already did.
As ballsy a bet as you could make in the venture industry. I mean that. We're like in a positive way.
Shervin, you want to comment?
Sure. No, those are all very reasonable feedback. The city pair analysis, actually, if you look at Asia, for example, the number of people that travel in between cities from Hong Kong to cities in China to Tokyo to South Korea to Singapore, etc. The numbers are staggering, and the distances are actually quite short. So when you actually look at Europe as another example, the distances are also quite short. And most of these designs would be city center to city center, just to reflect on what you're talking about. The other thing, and this comes from our co-chairman, David Sachs, his idea was to actually begin to build new cities in farmland, cheap land, completely new kind of city 2.0s that you can actually take Hyperloop to. The other thing I would say is in the fifth mode of transportation, which I didn't get to before I get buzzed again, it's not just about Hyperloop. There's other technologies that are coming. Some are kind of vertical takeoff supersonic jets. There is a technology that I just saw, which is a massive drone. It almost looks like something out of Star Wars. And the drone is actually amphibious, and it takes off of land, of water, and lands on water, and it takes cargo. And so it can take cargo from China to the US at 50% of the cost of a Boeing jet because it's flying 30 feet above the water. And because it can land in international waters, it doesn't need to go through all of the regulatory challenges and obstacles that exist. It does that. It takes 21 days to take a ship across the ocean. By the way, the 50 largest cargo ships in the world pollute the world more than all the cars that Bill Gurley hates added up together. So just those 50 ships.
Well, Peter Thiel said we wanted flying cars, and we got 140 characters, so here are your flying cars. And I'm glad somebody's thinking about them, so you get credit for that. Let's see how you think about the 5-year time frame. So cast your vote now.
Whoa. I'll have to prove you all wrong.
We hope you're right.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, if you'd get it in 6 years, we'll count it.
Okay, good.
That'll work.
I'll come back in 6 years.
Didn't they all see the cover of Forbes magazine with the Hyperloop on it?
I like the way the tie went back in here.
It's permanent. No.
Nice.
We print that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, trend number 7. This is from Rebecca. The reemergence of women in tech.
Never vote. She's don't even have to speak.
Let's just put it right to a vote. Just put it right to a vote. In the next 5 years, half of computer science students will be women, surpassing the previous high set in 1984. Little known fact, it actually used to be much higher than it is now. This means you'll increasingly see more female technology startup founders and Forbes 500 CEOs.
And mine's long. Is that? Don't start me out of.
What's that?
Mine's long. So.
You get plenty of time.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Excellent. So, as you can imagine, in the legal issues that have been in the public lately, I got lots of phone calls, as you probably did as well, asking about women in tech. And it's hard because as a woman, you don't really want to be the woman VC. You just want to be the good VC, so you hesitate to take those calls. But I got to admit, I got a little intrigued after a while of why this issue existed. So one thing is, today really like 10% of all CS majors are women. But what I found out, this wasn't always the fact. This wasn't always the case. In fact, many people who programmed the very first digital computers are women, and for decades, the number of women studying computer science grew faster than the number of men, and reached a peak in '84, about 30 years ago. And at this time, 36% of all CS majors were women, and there's a healthy list of women tech founders of really interesting companies: Heidi Roizen, Ann Lindblad, Diane Green, Sandy Kurtzig, Laura Harp, Audrey McLean. I have a long list. And Judy Faulkner, my personal favorite of Epic, who owns the whole freaking company. And so, what happened, right? And on one hand, I look at this and I'm like, this is really stupid. It's like the best possible work-life balance job you could have. I have friends who code in Hawaii as opposed to my friends who are lawyers, which is insane. And so, I think that, what I did was I went and I looked and I said, well, what happened here? And I called Audrey and I called Heidi and a bunch of people. And what you saw, here, roll back one slide really quick. Okay, so what you see here is the decline correlates to the advent of the personal computer in the home. So personal computer hits the home in '97. gained momentum in the 80s. And when this happened, programming became the sort of domain of nerds, geeks, hackers, nothing that young girls really want to aspire to. And the media targeted mostly men and young boys in commercials. And I actually was told there were these lovely Commodore computer ads with girls in bikinis going down water slides, and then really dorky guys sitting behind the computer. And I found some of those on YouTube, so you should go and check those out because they're kind of hilarious. And the general application was gaming, right? And few games really focused on girls. And so really people at home doing computers were boys. And then when the kids went to college, women entered CS, and Audrey is a professor at Stanford and testified to this, but they quickly dropped out because they were already behind so far. They hadn't spent years hacking in the basement at home. So it's kind of like going to study French, and you realize you're in a class of French nationals, right? And these girls had been really smart, had been the top of their class, and suddenly they were behind, so they chose a different engineering major typically. And there's also what I like to call the war games effect, right? So as adorable as Matthew Broderick was in 1982, he just wasn't something that girls wanted to aspire to. So you see 82 war games, Revenge of the Nerds, Weird Science, all geeky boys. I have what we're going to do about it. Okay.
We've been whipping along, so you can take another half minute.
Okay, and so the question is, well, what do we do, right? I don't think it's a STEM issue. I mean, I was a chemical engineer. 40–50% of people are women, or chemical engineers are women. Environmental engineering, biomedical engineering, all of those are almost half. But CS, for some odd reason, is 10–20%. And so what I really think we have to do, I have 2 daughters and I have a son, they are absolutely wired differently, right? And we have to give them things in context that they care about. So instead of killing people, you got to be helping animals, right? And so if you can just scroll to the next slide, if you would. And so, personal computer war games, then you do something in context that they actually care about it. And so I'm very optimistic we're going to fix this. We're all collectively on it. All the men I work with are like, what do we do? We have daughters. This is not how we want this to be. And there's a lot of not-profit organizations like Girls Who Code. They run 7-week immersion programs for girls from 6th to 12th grade with people that they can relate to in the program. Once they get into colleges, Harvey Mudd and Carnegie Mellon are amazing examples through their programs and actually doing things like including women on brochures, having women as campus guides, revising introductory courses to where you don't have to have prior experience to actually do it or have on-ramping courses. They've actually upped the number of women to 40% already. So I don't think it's that much of a task. We've seen what works, and we just need to replicate that. And they're on-ramping programs. All of these code academies, which I love. I think that was another trend I wanted, was the demise of the 4-year degree. These code academies, a lot of them are paying special attention to women. And then one more, there's really great programs like She++ at Stanford. I'm done.
Let's throw it to the panel. Paddles, up high.
Thanks.
All green. It's like, you'd be super unpopular if you did a red. Do you all agree in different ways, though?
I do anything.
Don't you take issue with anything Rebecca said? No.
No, I mean, no. But I think it's incredibly important, and it's beyond just wanting to be true, which I know she does. There's also the key question of what we can do about it. And investing in role models, people who run companies that help inspire the next generation is important. I was speaking at this conference called Dare to Be Digital, which is all for girls that want to go into, and try to inspire them to go into computer science. And I remember the Google executives were presenting a big study they had done of 1,600 women and why they chose computer science when they got to college. And what was interesting is that things like socioeconomic background or factors like race just didn't matter at all. It was a decision that was largely made before they got to college, and obviously parental influence and other role models had a huge impact. But one of the things I realized is that if someone is seeking to have a social impact, and a lot of people do in life, they don't sometimes realize that computer science is a great way to get there. And they found a huge inverse correlation in those girls who said, I want to have a meaningful social impact in the world, and they thought, well, therefore I won't do computer science. And that's one of the big things I think that can be addressed, because that's not the case. If you look at companies like Tesla or SpaceX, the #1 hiring need is software engineers, and that's really making a difference for the good of the world. And so I think as that message gets out there, and as more parents can realize that this is not a geeky war games like career path, it really is the path to almost every important career in the future. I think it will equilibrate more and become more balanced the way it is in every other engineering field over time.
All right. I'll say one.
Oh, sure.
One story I'll share again for my kids. My daughter, I used to read stories to her and record it. So when I was traveling, she would listen. She liked that, so she asked for it. And then one day she was like, I want a pillow that tells me stories, which was kind of a neat idea. And instead of just saying, oh, that's a neat idea, and then walking away, I kind of just got, ridiculously excited about the idea, and started brainstorming with her and drawing, and like she actually ended up getting a patent on it, and she would, and then she, met with women entrepreneurs and had mentorship sessions, and I think, part of it is like when a child, male or female, has an idea, it's so critical in those moments to reinforce that idea, that creativity with positivity. And I think, part of those trends might also have something to do with a bias towards reinforcement, positive reinforcement. When a boy or a girl has an idea, which one is actually being enveloped with positivity and support, and has an infrastructure of support. So I hope that any of these solutions that you're talking about can reverse that trend by having those kinds of support networks. I saw the critical part of that was I took her to Girls in Tech, and I was speaking, and I told her, hey, why don't you present your idea to all of these women?
Yeah.
And she got dressed up, and she was like, she was 9 years old, looked cute as a button, and she came with me, was excited, and then when she saw the crowd, she got really shy. And I knew in that moment, if I like pushed her, like, no, don't, go ahead, she might actually clam up and then always be fearful of presenting her ideas in front of people. So I backed off. I was like, you don't have to present at all. And then when she saw me speaking, she then put her hand up and she presented the idea. And the women just surrounded her like it's like like a village. So and they gave her so much support. And I think that kind of reinforcement has now turned into a 14-year-old teen that is the boss, is the CEO of the family. So.
Yeah. So what I mean. At least you know who the boss is. That's a good thing. One of the things too in our house, that I think is really important. So it's just how you think about programming, right? And so my little girl loves animals, and she has chickens and quail and all kinds of stuff. So she's going to start a little chicken egg selling business, right? And my husband was like, great. So instead of just taking care of the chickens, we're going to sit down and we're going to make a website, and you're going to learn how to like put it all together and do the financials and everything like that. So it's just encouraging them to take what their interest is anyway, and then pull that into like the actual business encoding and things like that. And I can't emphasize enough, especially for girls, taking them with you. So that C++ event, that picture was from, my daughter was so like shy on stage, she would literally throw up on the back of it. It was awful. And so I took her with me, and I was up on stage, and she was just kind of dumbfounded. She's like, isn't that scary? I'm like, yeah, it's totally scary. But you just get used to it and you do it anyway and you practice. And so just seeing that, the next time she goes into school, she's actually able to actually stand in the front row of the little kids singing, right? And she's like, Mommy, I just faked it. But they're able to do that because of the role models. So.
Can I order quail eggs on
demand? Yes, we have some.
Okay.
One thing that I think is creating positive momentum is just the more positive stories are being told. And so in our portfolio, Miriam, who's on the slide there, is an incredible CEO. Awesome. Katrina Lake at Stitch Fix is probably one of the best I've ever worked with. And I think Rebecca and Jenny are the some of the top VCs in the business, not qualified by gender. And I just hope that there's more momentum around that, because I think that's what will create inspiration.
All right. We've already got results in. Let's put those up on the board. All right.
Florida's 36%.
I don't remember those of you here last year. Mike Maples made a prediction last year that within 5 years there'll be a woman-led tech company with a $50 billion valuation. Exit. And he brought tears to his eyes to talk about it. Definitely.
I think Audie's the closest, isn't it?
Yeah.
To house, yeah.
All right. 6634. Print it.
All right.
People say print it. People still say print it. Is that okay if I do that?
Print it. Stop the presses. No, let's. The wisdom of the crowd will prove to be right on that one. Trend number 8: the economy of me. By 2020, mobile will bring the next 2 billion people online and make the online economy more powerful than offline. This shift will breed decentralized business models. Commerce and services will skip the middleman and revolve around the individual consumer. Welcome to the personal economy, and this is Jenny Lee's idea.
Yeah, so if you show the next slide. So the way I think about economy of me essentially is this. So by 2020, we are going to have 4 billion people online. And the 4 billion people online will be through the mobile phone, compared to 2 billion 2015. So in the span of the next 5 years, we are going to double the number of people who's going to come online through the mobile internet. If you look at where this 2 billion of folks they are going to come online, they are going to be global. US may contribute, 300-400 million of that 4 billion, 10%, 15%. China is going to be 600-700 million, maybe a billion, so 25%. But the bulk of the online folks are going to come from emerging economies, whether they are Brazil, Indonesia, India. So number one, this is going to be the single largest online community. It's not one nation. It's a 4 billion online nation. It's number one. If you turn to the next slide. So the online population. If you're a startup looking at this market, you should be ecstatic. And this market, what that means is that everything is going to be available online. And when I said the commerce, the whole retail as we know it is going to be revamped, is this: why do you need to now travel 30 minutes, an hour to the Costco down the road, to the Walmart down the road, to the Macy's down the road, if you can get this at your fingertips on your phone instantly, based on what you want? And this commerce level is going to happen on a global basis. Folks here sitting in this room can buy products through one of our investment Wish from China, just sitting here and having it delivered to you at your home a couple of days later. Similarly, consumers in China can sit in China and watch us online or buy products online as well. And so the retail part, where retail is so location-based, so specific to a specific location and choice and curation, that's all going to go away. Because at the end of the day, it's going to come down to me, right? The personal economy. What do I want? How do I want my product to be like? When do I want it to be delivered? And so watch out retail. I think that's going to be disrupted. And then welcome, I think, to the me economy, which is, I like to call it the lazy me, but most people don't quite like this word. We like to think of ourselves as hardworking. I'm very hardworking when it comes to work, but when it comes to home and services, I like to stay at home, have my pedicure delivered to me, manicure, my lunches, food, and so if you look at this, this is how my two trends tie together: the hardware, the non-intrusive, predictive hardware learning about me, and then the services and commerce that can come to me at the time and where I want it to be.
Okay, let's see the panels. Jenny's really talking about the acceleration of a trend that's been underway for 20 years, driven by the rapid uptake of 2 billion incremental people. Raise those paddles high. Okay, Steve Jurvetson, you're skeptical.
Well, yeah, but for a weird reason. To me, it was the obviousness thing. It's sort of a trend that has been true since the 90s, through the noughties, to the present day, continuing on the exact same curve for the next 5 to 10 years. I don't see any knee or explosive growth from that. It'd be like saying Moore's Law goes for 5 more years. It's going to be an important tech trend, but nothing's changing. And the prediction that so what is the actual statement of maybe some cheekiness is that the online economy is more powerful than the offline, and that's just not going to be true. It's in the developed world, 5% of GDP, 6% of e-commerce. In the undeveloped world, half that. And by all forecasts, it's not going to even double. So we're not even going to be a quarter of the economy. So it will be important. And for people in the internet economy, it's going to be doubling. It's going to be quadrupling. That's really exciting for people in that industry, but it doesn't hold a candle to, unfortunately, to the rest of the economy yet. But I'm optimistic, because that means there's just more growth potential in the future, just not in 5 years, and no particular sea change that's happening that I could see.
I think part of this might be a branding issue, because I like the virtual me and the economy of me and the mini-me connection between the two trends, but it might have done you a disservice, because I actually think in a slightly better way to describe it is in the atoms and bits world of the digital and the physical coming together, this kind of on-demand trend, it has a lot to do with what the insights that you're talking about here in the economy of me, and being able to push a button and get anything you want delivered to you, because I'm lazy like you too, and I'd like those things to be delivered. That'd be great to save time. But I think describing it in that way would be more accurate in terms of the next 5 years.
It's actually consistent with your Skynet, isn't it, Steve?
Well, it's consistent. You would need Skynet to get to those people too, yeah.
So I'd like to comment on this. So I sent in my trends late, and I got an email back that said one of mine was disqualified because Ginny had already done it, which was this one. And so I'm a huge fan of this. I'm seeing this. I'm seeing accelerated personalization. We have a company called SailThrough that helps publishers and e-commerce providers personalize. And we'll see as much as like 80% lift in conversion or page views once you start tracking the individual and delivering solutions directly to them. I'm on the board of another company called Stitch Fix. If there are any women in the audience that haven't used it, I'd encourage you to try. Each and every shipment that's sent out is personalized to each and every user based on data. It's a lot like Moneyball for retail. There's 40 people, I think, on the data science team. And I do think this is a massive new trend. And I think companies that don't figure out how to treat every individual specifically are going to fail to wow the individual.
Rebecca?
No, I see this every day. I mean, you hear about more and more. I mean, there's even pharmacies that will just deliver to your door online, or not even pharmacies, but just services, right? So practically everything that you could want. You could actually never leave your home. It's great for hermits, actually. You could literally never leave your home, and everyone would just come to you.
Well, you won't have a car, so you'll need it delivered.
You don't need, yeah, you don't. Why do you need a car if you never have to go anywhere? We're going to be like the anti-social society. That's what'll happen.
We can walk to the restaurant because there's no parking spaces. So.
Jenny, a minute rebuttal or additional thoughts?
No, I think that global is a key trend. And I know sitting in the US, it may seem weird to be just thinking about global. But where I am, I think whether it's the consumption behavior, the new folks emerging consumer internet users coming online on a global basis, there's a lot to be said to understand where that trend is, right? So predicting is one thing. A part of predicting is making sure that we can invest in key leading companies and make a lot of money, right? And so do not ignore what's happening on the global front. A lot of times what other users are in different countries are doing may not mirror exactly what you like to see, but that's the new tomorrow. That's where the new companies are going to come from.
All right, it's time for you all to vote. So vote early, vote hard, and we'll see what you think. That one is narrower than I thought. It's beginning to settle in. I would have thought it would have been more, but I guess many of you felt as Steve Jurvetson did that this is a trend that's been underway and what is new and distinctive about it. Okay, should we call it a wrap? Print it?
Print it. We're on the roll presses. All right, so I predict this is the second to last trend. Number 9, rise of the robocars. Again, with the cars. This is Steve Jurvetson's. By 2020, we will no longer debate the inevitability of autonomous electric vehicles when we first experience the convenience and efficiency of urban autonomous driving services.
All right. So again, trying to think what's really big, important, is going to affect a lot of people. The $2 trillion automotive industry comes to mind. The fact that we spend $2 billion a day on oil in the United States, just in the United States, and it's an incredibly inefficient system. To be clear here, I'm not saying that you're all going to have robocars. I wish I could have one by then. I probably won't. But for those of us who have a chance to be in one, whether it's in Vegas, wherever the pilot deployments occur, there'll be one of those epiphanies, kind of like she had driving her Tesla, that's like you would never go back. Like once you've experienced what this can be, you'll see what it can be. I've been in these vehicles. You can show the one slide I have. If you want, several times, several different types. And I can tell you, I believe they're already safer than my parents, and I would trust my kids with them, no doubt about it. And they're just going to get better. The sensors are getting cheaper, the Moore's Law is improving, and the opportunity here is quite amazing. So initially, there'll be low-speed services, 25 miles an hour or less in urban settings, something like a robo-Uber or robo-Lyft. It'll be feathered into those services, of course, as well, not just new entrants that are doing it. And what it'll offer is unprecedented efficiency, both fuel efficiency, timing efficiency. The safety concerns that people mentioned would, of course, go away. It will be the ultimate future. But it's also going to extend out to, of course, to all the other kinds of vehicles. Every automotive maker is working down this path, and it'll be for both urban and highway driving. And it will offer you opportunities that are roughly 10 times better. All the deaths that were mentioned, all those problems, at least a 10x improvement, 10x efficiency in the number of cars you need per city to get the same job done. With many fewer taxis than we have in New York today, you can get one of these within 30 seconds of wanting one, right, at a much lower cost per mile driven. It's in fact more cost effective than mass transit itself in urban and suburban environments, which is kind of amazing. The thing that many of you probably felt today trying to drive here is that hellish commute, right, that we all experience. The average American spends 52 minutes a day, 4 billion hours a year wasted in a car. These autonomous vehicles, because they know before they move or they accelerate, brake, turn, they can compensate with active suspension to totally eliminate all the drift. So you could read without getting nauseous. You could actually be productive. You could be drunk. You could do whatever you want in your car because you're not driving. And this, to me, I think it will be such a compelling future that it will drive urban redesign, the removal of parking lots, the fact that people spend 40% of their urban time looking for parking shows you how painful it is in an urban environment. So it'll start there. Once you have a taste of it, you'll never want to go back. And I think it'll usher in a future where we'll just have much safer roads, avoid global gridlock, and ideally no teen driving. So hopefully your son will be like mine. Just avoid those first years altogether. Here you can see crash risk by age. By the way, boys with ADD are worse than drunk drivers every day of their life. I want that to end.
As a father of two viciously ADD sons, I can agree with you.
Just don't do it.
Panelists, so the green or red paddles, the bet is that we won't be debating the inevitability anymore in 5 years. And when you'll get the taste and you won't want to go back. Sideways.
Hold them high.
They're all sideways.
A lot of sideways.
Hold on.
Green.
I think in 5 we'll
We
see.
don't believe
Except for
her.
Rebecca.
Yep.
What?
Rebecca, you agree with
I
Steve.
agree. I think we'll see the inevitability in 5 years, absolutely. My poor little guy, he's 5, and the thing he likes to do more than anything else in the world is drive. And I kind of feel bad for him because I don't think he's going to get to by the time he turns 16. So, yeah.
Wild the sideways.
I mean, in the longer arc of the near future, I think it's absolutely right. I just knowing enough about this in terms of robocars and self-driving cars, I don't think we're going to see the trend really, exploding in the next 5 years. But in the arc of 15, 20 years, absolutely. The regulatory side of things is also interesting.
Yeah, I agree with Shervin. I just think I think there's a high risk of a trough, what is it called, a trough of disillusionment. Like right now, we're kind of at peak hype cycle, and I think it's longer out. Real quick, Barclays yesterday issued a 50-page report analyzing the combination of my theme and Steve's theme, and they say, now that's disruptive. They use the same ratio you did. Shared vehicles can replace 9x the number of traditional vehicles.
That's right. That's right.
And
It's
so
a 10x improvement.
they say it could lead to a 50% decline in vehicle ownership. And those are really huge, I mean, very disruptive notions at that scale.
Right, well, so that's, I mean.
Steve, you want?
Yeah, I think that's why I try. I mean, when something's.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
gonna
Oh, yeah,
add.
go ahead.
So I love the idea of robocar. In fact, anything autonomous, flying or driving, it's in my sweet spot. I hope to see it really full-fledged in 5 years. But I do see that when it comes to auto-driving cars, it's going to take place mostly on commercial and public transportation, where it's a bit more fixed route. When it comes to having roads redesigned to cater to mass consumer auto driving in 5 years, I think that's going to take some time.
Oh, no. So there'll be no change in the roads or anything. You just feather in with the existing system. And I agree, that'll happen too, the fixed route. The reason, when something's big, it's not going to change. Just like electric vehicles haven't become the majority of vehicles. But you can sort of see the inevitability, you can sort of sense the future and invest in that trajectory, let's say for urban planning or things that are longer out. So I think I agree it won't have happened in 5 years by any means, but we'll see that the explosive growth is coming. In fact, Travis recently told me that in 2020, if Teslas were autonomous, he'd want to buy all of them. And I was like, what do you mean? He said, all 500,000 of estimated 2020 production, I want them all. Yeah, but he couldn't get a return call for Elon, so, whatever.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I heard the Ford CEO, Mark Field, said he thinks 5 years is more realistic than not.
Yeah.
And then he's a car guy.
Oh, no, they'll be there. It's just not penetrate. I mean, it takes a while because people don't buy cars that quickly. Right?
But it was see the inevitability, right?
Yeah,
That was
exactly.
the question.
Right.
Exactly.
Y'all, what do you think? Will you taste it, and will you not want to go back?
Wow.
The robo-car.
Tasty.
People want to drink and drive.
I should have just led with that.
I saw a survey
Clear
of
consensus.
Uber riders, and like 35% were because they wanted to drink. It's like, why do you use it? Oh, okay.
At least they're doing that, right?
No, that's right.
Wait, it's
That's
way
right.
better
That's
than
a
the
good thing.
alternative. Okay,
Should be
that's
your
it.
advertising copy.
The audience has spoken.
That's a pretty overwhelming one. We're down to our last trend, number 10. It's Bill Gurley's. The native mobile application platform will dominate the mobile web. Consumers drastically prefer mobile applications to the mobile web because they are way better. The majority of incremental internet users will be exclusively on smartphones. The aging search browser platform will be stifled as a fertile ground for new innovation.
Yeah, and so what I'm really getting at here is, and by the way, this was my third one, so for what it's worth, like I already had my second one taken away. But, and it's more tactical than the others because a lot of the others are kind of big trends. This is more about kind of startup execution. But there's a big debate out there amongst mostly consumer internet companies about whether you want to support the mobile web, which is basically HTML and a deep linked search environment against a browser, or build native apps. And certainly Google has an incentive to have people believe in the latter. What I'm seeing is that consumers vastly prefer native apps, and there's actually been some studies done on this. I'll give you two examples. One, DirecTV, which I'm a huge user of. If you want to program your DirecTV on your browser, it's actually a huge pain in the ass. They make you log in, whereas on the native app they don't. The search is worse. I bet you I can program my DVR on my smartphone in about 1/10 of the time than I can on the browser. I was going to use another example of a panelist, Shervin, with Munchery. I bet if you're sitting in front of a computer and you want to order Munchery, I bet you grab your smartphone.
Absolutely.
Because it's 2 clicks away. And this notion of the smartphone as a remote control for your life, you can't deliver that one-click stuff if you're trying to do it through this HTML5. The second point I made, which is in most of the rest of the world, India and China, there will be no desktop. The computer will be the smartphone, and so it's the only platform they'll know. Interestingly, a few weeks ago, Flipkart announced that they were no longer going to even support the mobile web, that the only thing you'd see if you searched for Flipkart was an ad to download the app, which I thought was really prescient of where this is going. And lastly, I really believe that the browser and search are kind of like a platform. A lot of startups designed to that. They were SEO startups, SEM startups. And I think that platform's finally maturing. And Google, I think, feels it. There's been a lot. Last week, there was something about them putting e-commerce buttons on. I think they feel that they're going to have to move up the stack, which is going to make it a dangerous place for a startup to be living anyway. So if you look at companies like Uber, Snapchat, whatever, they don't even think about the mobile web. They're native app only. And I think that's where the majority of the equity value creation is going to come from for startups.
Well, this is about the 20th anniversary of the web browser, isn't it? So that's been around a long time. Hold your paddles high. Do you agree with Bill? Or I don't know who would disagree, but would you agree to the extent that he agrees that it's really more disruptive than obvious?
Yep. That's the issue.
Okay, hold them high.
Oh.
Okay.
Well, then I'll go like that. You reminded me of the obvious point.
Two agreements and two sideways. Yeah. So let's hear from the sideways.
Yeah, so 5 years ago, I am 100% supportive of this. When I first had my multiple smartphones, it was all about the native app. It was easy to surf, control, use the native app, whether it's for gaming, for search, and things like that. But over the last couple of years, increasingly I find that I've been pulling up the mobile web a lot more. Why? Number one, my smartphone is extremely cluttered right now. I have 50 apps, native apps. It's actually very hard for me to find the stuff that I want, whether it's a restaurant review or news or information. So I'm actually finding that my web surfing consumption behavior has shifted from non-search based on mobile phone to now increasingly 20, 30, 40% search based on the mobile web. And so, I do feel that if you're a startup and you're trying to have a great consumer behavior on the mobile phone, you have to consider how to merge both the native app and the mobile web, because I do feel that there are different emerging, or use case that can justify swinging back to supporting the mobile web.
Steve?
Yeah, so I was green, but I flipped a little bit to wishy-washy just on your obviousness, Narendra. Right now, between 85 and 86% of all time is spent in-app on the smartphone. So it's already there as a percentage. And by everyone's forecast, smartphones will be 90% of all broadband access by 2020. So he's definitively right, I think. And you're also right that it highlights some of the challenges in-app search right now is kind of broken. And so we've been trying to invest in things that are trying to solve that problem. So it is an issue right now that people don't use a lot of apps. And in almost every geography, the top 5 apps are the vast majority of usage. The top 5 varies a little bit by geography, but it's the same 5. And the total number of apps anyone has stayed pretty steady, growing from 23 to 26. So it still is important. It's still we spend most of our time doing, but what it is, it's social, it's messaging, it's watching videos. Whether that got to us via an app or via a search or a link someone sent us, almost is secondary to what we're actually spending time on is those same activities we've always done.
How about you, Shervin and Rebecca? What basically I think we're saying here is that it's a trend that's been underway and is clear and obvious, is even going to be bigger than most people think.
I feel like it's patent law here again, right? They killed on obviousness. But I will say, I have noticed it's annoying sometimes. I will flip over to the browser because it always wants me to update my apps, and then it's just a time issue. I'm like, screw that, I'll just go to the browser and do that instead. So there's a little bit of an efficiency issue there from time to time, but I would agree overall.
I spent a short stint at Mozilla as Chief Application Officer, and I have to tell you that the search, app search, is so abysmal. It still is today. If you take out on iOS, it's horrible, and it's one of those things that it's just laziness. I think in companies, there just is a laziness to improve that experience because consumers are downloading and discovering it on the top of the charts, which is interesting, and yes, that should be an interesting way of search. But if you put in keywords in search, it's an area that I think Bill is really interesting from a potential discovery of a company that could really improve that experience. But I do agree with you. The backwater effect on the web will also be a little sad, given we've grown up with the web, but it's going to turn into this backwater of just like landing pages, similar to Benchmark's website. Little dig at the end there.
You have a minute of rebuttal, or however you'd like to
No,
use
I
that
just
minute.
drive home a couple points. One, I think part of the reason
You can't
for
drive, Bill. You have to.
Yeah, fair enough. I'll ride home.
People are getting punchy.
Yeah.
Home.
Part of the issue is that the verticals have just gotten a lot better. So if you want to do a flight search, kayaks better than typing it. The notion of Ohm used to use the phrase "the box and the 10 blue links." It's a pretty crude result set relative to other things, and I just think the verticals have gotten way better. They understand it more deeply, and that enables this kind of remote control like effect. The second thing that I would ride home is simply that I think the platform's maturing to a point where, I said it before, but where there won't be an opportunity for a startup. So I think you're going to see Google in the next 5 years in an effort to try and catch up, try and close the loop more, like this buy button they just talked about. They've been doing this in travel, and it's going to take away this fertile ground for a startup to get launched off of that used to be there. And that was one of my main points.
Okay. Well, why don't we, you all weigh in on this with your vote. I think what Bill was saying is we're kind of entering the quickening maturity phase of the app generation of mobile. And you're off to a robust
It's much
start
better than
here.
the last time, unless there's a quick reversal, which would be very upsetting.
Yeah, that one looks pretty stable, so let's record it.
All right.
Just a couple comments, and I'll turn it over to you, is that other than Shervin's big bold bet on Hyperloops, which you're kind of shot down there, buddy, even though, because you took the boldest step here. Most of the votes were all within, none of them were more than a 75-25, and there are a whole heck of a lot of them in the 60-40 range.
So before we reveal the winner, whoever's trend was most voted on, we're going to see some drawings from Pam Davis.
Oh, cool.
Bring them up here. Did you draw everybody? Okay.
Wow, bonus.
Are we going to get a chance to hold them up to the, yeah, they can see. Who's that?
Yes,
Bill? That's Bill?
look younger.
That's kind of cool. Oh, there we go. That's,
Oh, I get to keep it. Thank you
there
so
you go,
much.
keeper. There's Steve. Yeah. Can very. Oh, that's nice.
Very nice.
Really good.
Very good.
Yeah.
I like it. Thank you.
It's Jenny.
Oh, very
Wow.
nice. I like that.
That's good. Golden hair.
Static.
That's how I feel most days.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Oh, so sorry. Oh, sure. There you go.
Thank you.
Nice.
Very regal.
Very nice.
Oh my gosh, what a handsome guy.
Oh, I got the rough draft. Yeah, the rough draft too. I think that's the draft.
Oh,
Make
sorry.
everyone look younger. It's true.
Didn't draw the wrinkles.
I think.
Oh, sure.
Sure.
I'm connected here. Hold on. I'm gonna
Bill, you need
Give me
your
shorter.
drawing.
lose mine.
Oh.
Get our red shoes.
Wow, that's a lot of shots.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. There's mine.
All right, so let's pull up the slide and find out who it is that will get to wear the wizard cape,
Oh.
Oh, the rise of the robocars.
imbued with magical powers.
No.
And it is the rise of the robocars.
No way.
So it's
Yeah.
who did that one?
I did.
Steve
Yeah,
Jurvetson.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Yeah, that's embarrassing me.
Heavyweight champion.
I have to wear it?
Oh, nice.
Look at you.
Yeah.
And everybody.
Oh, it's a little twirl.
You're gonna take off?
You do that a little too well.
Oh, I know. I do this at home all the time. This is perfect for my ensemble.
Did you bring your hat as well? Did you
I
have?
do. I left it in the car. Crap. I can go get it, though.
Okay.
He has a show after this.
Yeah. I'm here all night.
All right, so should we give a round of applause for all the panelists? What do you think? Yeah? All right. Rich, what do you make of the results? What do you think?
Steve Jurvetson has just been proven very hard to beat at these events over the years, so thank you for coming and congratulations again, Steve. Did you know that our panelists get to keep their paddles?
Wow.
This is the
Did
spanking.
not know.
Great.
It's definitely good for spankings.
Right?
You can use it to hail your car when you get outside.
Yeah.
Moving around. But no, it's a tough job in order to come up with something that's not obvious. As we heard, there's some things that we see a lot of echoes of predictions from the past. I think we've had the personalized me web every other year for the last 10, but obviously it's something that it's worth betting on, and it keeps getting closer and closer. But there's a lot of consensus, not as close as last year, but certainly a lot more consensus at the top than we thought there would be.
And just to show you how hard this is, Hal Kellman, who's in the audience and has been a regular attendee of Churchill Club events and is a successful technology investor, just to show you how hard predictions are, Hal gave me this piece, Scientific American, year 2007, A Robot in Every Home by Bill Gates. So there you go.
There you are.
All right, thank you all. Good night.